Easter does not actually begin with triumph. It actually begins with grief. It begins with confusion. It begins with love that has nowhere to go because death has stolen the beloved. The first witnesses do not arrive at the tomb with bold theology and certain faith. They arrive with spices, with tears, with trembling hands. And that is precisely where resurrection meets them. This matters because we live in a culture that is saturated with death. Not only physical death, but the daily deathliness of despair, violence, and cruelty, and the slow numbing that comes from living in a world that seems perpetually on fire. Many people today are not rejecting faith. They are exhausted by it, or rather, by the distorted versions of it. Faith used as a weapon. Faith reduced to tribal affinity. Faith dressed up as superiority. Easter confronts all of that. The resurrection is not a spiritual metaphor or a sentimental symbol. It is the announcement that God has entered the worst and returned undefeated. Christ does not escape suffering. He carries it through death into a new creation. The risen Jesus is not scrubbed clean. He still bears wounds. The scars remain, but now they are transfigured. No longer signs of defeat, but the very fruit of love. This means resurrection is not denial. It is not a command to move on or stay positive. Resurrection is God's refusal to let death have the final word, whether that death is in bodies, in relationships, in societies, or in souls. To live Christ's story, then, is not to pretend the world is fine. It is to become the kind of people who carry Easter into the places where Good Friday still seems a permanent state. It is to be a community shaped by mercy rather than by resentment, by truth rather than by spin, by courage rather than by fear. It is to refuse the cheap certainties of culture wars and to choose instead the slow, holy labour of reconciliation. Easter joy, then, is not shallow happiness. It is sturdy. It is robust. It is the joy that can lament and still sing, the joy that can bury the dead and still plant seeds, the joy that can name injustice and still refuse hatred. And the Church, at its best, becomes a living sign of that story. A people who do not need to win every argument, because they belong to the one who has already won the victory that matters. A people who can be generous, because scarcity is not our deepest reality. A people who can forgive, because death has been undone. Living Christ's story means allowing resurrection not only to comfort us, but to convert us, until our lives once more begin to look like hope made flesh. Thank you so much for listening, and may God bless you all.